Former Vice President Joe Biden is topping the 2020 Democratic presidential field in Iowa. That's according to a new Monmouth University poll released Thursday. The poll shows Biden with 27% of support among Democratic caucus goers. Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders is in second, with 16% of those polled saying they would support him if the election were held today. And South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg, a relative unknown just months ago, is in third. The poll also found that health care and environmental concerns were the top issues for voters in the state. Let's bring in Caitlin Huey-Burns and Scott Detrow. Caitlin is a CBSN political reporter, and Scott covers Congress and the 2020 presidential campaign for NPR. He's also the co-host of the NPR Politics podcast. Welcome to you both. Caitlin, I want to start with you and ask about Joe Biden, because even after these recent allegations of inappropriate touching, he is still on top in Iowa. And I wonder if that's a sign that voters are willing to overlook those issues.
Well, I think the campaign in waiting, because he hasn't actually announced yet, feels like they have survived those allegations and the news storm that came from it. However, I would note that as we're looking at these polls, Joe Biden, we know, is very beloved among Democrats, and he is very well known among Democrats. So when you're looking at these early state polls, he is doing very well, leading the pack in all of these polls. And I think that's largely reflective of his name recognition and the idea that he served for a very popular president among Democrats, Barack Obama, and is a popular figure among Democrats himself. The question I have is, after he gets into this race, as people start to officially compare him to these other candidates, whether that actually holds. It's still very early, and the Biden camp or his team has been kind of making the pitch of Biden's electability, that you may like all of these other candidates that you're seeing, but Biden is the only one that can defeat Trump. I think there are a lot of questions that still remain about whether that's still the case, and these other candidates that we're seeing surge, Pete Buttigieg among them, shows that there isn't a real front runner in this field, that there is some real fluidity here, and that voters are at least interested in some of these other candidates.
So it is so early, as Caitlin said, Scott, and as we mentioned, the poll has Mayor Pete Buttigieg in third with 9% of support. Former Texas Congressman Beto O'Rourke trailed with only 6%. So, Scott, what's behind the shift in momentum for each of those candidates? Is it possible to tell right now?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree that I think these early polls really come down to name ID more than anything else. And I think that's why Buttigieg rising up to third place in this poll really is so remarkable and worth noting. There's been a lot of conversation in the last few weeks about whether there's a disconnect between the social media circles of, the activists, the voters who are paying real close attention early on, the reporters doing the same, and like real regular voters and who are only casually following the race. Buttigieg certainly has had a moment being profiled a lot, having a lot of buzzy viral moments. And I think both this poll and the fact that at the end of the first quarter of fundraising, he outraised several people who have been national figures for years. I think that shows that he is gaining traction and he is getting the attention of voters. The question is, similar to Biden, at some point, all of these candidates, 18 and counting, are going to start campaigning against each other in addition to for themselves. And, when Buttigieg's record in South Bend starts getting really poked at, some of his statements get poked at, does that gloss, shine off? I think there's an argument that he could be in the top tier to stay for a while because we've seen him be really good on television, be really good in key moments. I think he's someone who could be well positioned in those first wave of debates when all the candidates are on the stage at the same time.
Let's talk about issues. Caitlin, you have a new piece out on CBSNews.com discussing how Democrats need an immigration plan to beat President Trump. Well, only 14% of those polled said immigration was the most important issue. So what more can you tell us about that?
Well, it's really interesting, just to kind of set the scene. Yesterday, President Trump went to San Antonio to host a fundraiser, and he told reporters there that immigration, the border, was going to be a central issue, a key issue, the key issue to his 2020 re-election campaign, essentially. That same day, Julian Castro, the former mayor of San Antonio, former Obama administration official who's also running for president, had a dueling event where he was actually asked why he was the only candidate in this field who had released kind of a comprehensive, detailed immigration proposal. And he kind of said, yeah, I don't know why. We know the president is making immigration central to his re-election campaign. I don't know why Democrats aren't doing the same. Democratic activists and policy experts that I spoke to today say that just talking about Trump's immigration policies, however cruel they are in their view, isn't enough, that they still know that they need to combat it with their own policies here. So they've talked about things like a comprehensive immigration reform plan that includes a pathway to citizenship for the undocumented, a citizenship for dreamers. We've also seen, as Castro's proposal outlines, a repealing of some immigration laws that make border crossing illegal, a criminal offense, changing that. We're seeing some proposals floated out there, but we know that the president is going to use this as a way to really hammer Democrats. Democrats argue that in 2018, in the midterms, the president made this part of his closing pitch and wasn't successful. But presidential and midterm elections are a little bit different, so they feel like they have to, at some point, have something policy-wise to draw a contrast.
So, Caitlin, what about health care? Because you look at the numbers, 51% of those polled said health care was the most important issue. Is there a sense among Democrats that it's the issue that won them, that allowed them to win in 2018 and will allow them to win once again in 2020?
Absolutely. And I hear that from voters on the ground, especially in some of these early states, that when you ask them what their top concerns are, healthcare still ranks high among them. There is this concern that that there could be some kind of change to their existing plan. You see a lot of Democrats embracing a Medicare for all proposal or a single payer system, or at least expanding the current healthcare system. That's pretty popular among Democrats right now, but there's also this question about what's in those details of those policies that I think Democrats are going to have to try to figure out. But they do think that healthcare is a winning issue for them. It's a proven winning issue, as you mentioned, the midterms, and the president trying to draw attention to Republicans just a couple of weeks ago. Democrats were very heartened by that.
Well, Scott, you have a piece coming out Friday morning looking at Senator Bernie Sanders and how he is focusing on electability. What more can you tell us about that?
Yeah, this has been a really interesting thing to me, and I feel like so many other reporters have said the same thing. State after state, voter after voter. Certainly health care is a top issue, but you know, when you say, what is this election about to you, so many people come back saying it's about finding somebody who can beat Donald Trump. I just want a Democrat to beat Donald Trump. A lot of campaigns have told me that this has been something that pops up in their focus groups as well. And you're seeing Sanders being the latest Democrat to say, I'm electable, and to make that point by going to the 3 states that made Donald Trump president and could undo his presidency if Democrats win them back. And that's, of course, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. So Sanders is going to be in all of those states over the next few days, a couple other Midwestern states as well. And his argument is that the populism that he really focuses on, raising the minimum wage, Medicare for all, a lot of big picture, dealing with college student debt, things like that. His campaign is arguing that Donald Trump took a populist approach, and that's what helped him narrowly win these states. And they feel like Sanders talking about that, as much as Republicans are going to attack socialism and the liberal drift of the Democratic Party, they feel like voters are with them on these issues, and they're going to lean into what Sanders has been talking about all along. So he's going to be in those states. Of course, Beto O'Rourke was in Pennsylvania, Amy Klobuchar was in Wisconsin, Kirsten Gillibrand was in Michigan. I think all of these candidates are going to repeatedly go to these states and say, I'm the person who can win them back.
So to your point about electability, 64% of Democrats, Scott, surveyed in Iowa, said they would rather pick a candidate they don't agree with, who can beat President Trump, over a candidate they do agree with, who would have a tough time winning. So when you look at this in practical terms, how might that feeling impact this primary?
I think it's a big trend of this race, and I think the hard thing to figure out for the campaigns trying to put together a strategy and for us trying to cover it is, what does electability actually mean? Because you could get 10 people in a room and 10 different people would have 10 different answers on electability.
Is it the eye of the beholder, right? That could be in the eye of the beholder.
Exactly. And I think that's the key choice that candidates have to make. Is that saying I can beat you in these key states? Is that saying I'm the best to beat you at this one issue? I think the one thing a lot of the campaigns agree on is that electability is not trying to play the Donald Trump game, not trying to go toe-to-toe with Trump in terms of insulting divisive politics. Democrats, by and large, are drifting the other direction.
So President Trump's former chief strategist, Steve Bannon, discussed the 2020 election with Politico, and he said this about the Democratic field, quote, "They must see something in the field that makes them feel like they can make a run. I don't see anybody in that field as of now who can take on Trump one-on-one." So, Scott, do Democratic candidates feel like they need to focus more on beating President Trump if they want to be successful in 2020, or are they still trying to figure that out?
Well, I think it's still early on. I think it's less about attacking Donald Trump day in, day out. A lot of the campaigns tell me he's in the news every day, he's tweeting every day. We don't need to talk about him. I think it's drawing that contrast. But you know, I think this is something that's going to sort itself out over the next few months. And if you look at the top of the field, so far, Democratic voters are interested in the names they've heard about: Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden. They are consistently in the high 20s, mid 20s, where everyone else is in the single digits. But I think it's a great question. I would love to know the answer of what exactly electability means to most voters.
I feel like that's the question.
Make it a lot easier to sort out these 18 candidates.
I feel like that's the question to be asking all these voters. What does that look like to you, right? All right, I want to end with former Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe, who had this to say about a potential 2020 run on Wednesday. Let's listen.
And all I can tell you, I have not made my decision yet. I'm very close. But I just want you to remember one thing. Of all the candidates running, how many have actually wrestled in 280-pound, 8-foot alligator for a political contribution for $15,000? How many? I'm your man, folks. There is nobody else can do it. If I can wrestle an alligator, I can sure as hell wrestle Donald Trump, boy, and that would be worth it. And you'd pay money to watch that debate.
All right, some quick background here. In 1980, McAuliffe wrestled an 8-foot, 260-pound gator in exchange for a $15,000 contribution for President Jimmy Carter's re-election campaign. He also tweeted this earlier Thursday. It says, quote, "If I could wrestle an 8-foot, 280-pound alligator, I certainly would have no problem with you-know-who." I want to get both of your reactions to this, because why not? Caitlin, let's start with you. I mean, Bannon said he doesn't see anyone who could go toe-to-toe. Steve Bannon said that.
Well, McAuliffe mentions the debate stage, and when I talk to voters in these early states, this is kind of how they're thinking about this process as they're assessing the candidates. They kind of are starting to envision who would be on that debate stage with Donald Trump. And that's really remarkable, given that there are so many candidates in this race that they're already thinking this strategically about their choice. So we could see that that could be a big part of McAuliffe's pitch. The big question is where he fits in this already crowded field. He is a long-time Democratic fundraiser. He's been a prolific fundraiser, but this is a field that is prizing those small dollar grassroots donations. He also has deep ties to the Clintons, and we're not quite sure how that will play this time around.
Scott, what do you think?
2 points here. First of all, this is one of those moments where you see the secondary tweet, and I just saw McAuliffe tweet the picture of that crab with the alligator, and I was like, somehow I had missed this moment in political history, right? And I was like, what is going on here? So lots of Googling later. Like,
we're
okay,
showing it right now. Okay, what? What is this?
The broader... The broader serious point, besides, also, like, is the crab and the alligator friends in that picture?
I don't know.
A lot of
what is
questions that have
happening?
nothing
What's
to
the
do with
takeaway
politics.
message there? Okay, go ahead.
But to the main point, I think on this subjective issue of electability and going up with Donald Trump, that's why I think this first debate is going to be a really key moment, because if this is a subjective thing, seeing all these candidates, even if you have to divide it into 2 debates, which they're going to do, seeing the candidates answer the same question back to back, go back and forth, even just stand on the stage next to each other, the first few rounds of polls after that, I think that could give us a sense of what voters actually mean when they say, I want the most electable candidate.
I imagine there are campaigns
Maybe it'll be a crab, who knows?
I imagine there are folks who are laser focused on those debate preps right now as we speak. Caitlin Huey-Burns and Scott Detrow, thanks to you both. Really appreciate it.